So the Crown makes a series of acknowledgements, including that Te Whānau Apanui has upheld its obligations as a treaty partner and tried over many years to have the Crown uphold their obligations under the treaty. So it talks of our efforts to continue to hold the Crown to account, because this is not the first time we've been to the table with the Crown to remind them of their treaty obligations. So this acknowledges the long journey, not just of the current negotiation team, which has actually been a flash of history, a small blink of an eye compared to the 184 odd years our tipuna have tried to hold this government to account also. The acknowledgements make reference to the fact that Apanui has upheld its treaty obligations. We have been honourable treaty partners. The acknowledgements talk of the tino rangatiratanga of the Hapū of Te Whānau Apanui, and that acts and omissions of the Crown have undermined the tino rangatiratanga of the Hapū of Te Whānau Apanui. This is the first time this is going to appear in print in the history of our nation, that the Crown actually admit that they have undermined their laws, their policies, their actions and omissions have undermined and have sought in some places to undermine our rangatiratanga. There's acknowledgement that the Crown's assimilationist policies negatively impacted on the Hapū of Te Whānau Apanui. As we know, that effort to have us all as one New Zealand, which really meant put down your Apanuitanga, put down your rangatiratanga and come under Crown authority. They've admitted that the assimilation policies have negatively impacted on our Hapū. The Crown acknowledged their acts and omissions undermined the tikanga of the Hapū of Te Whānau Apanui in relation to our lands and our territories, and that has caused or contributed to the alienation of some of those lands and territories, and has contributed to our alienation from those lands and territories. So it's interrupted that relationship. The Crown acknowledge and admit that they did not consult with Te Whānau Apanui before introducing native land laws in the 1860s, and that the operation and impact of those laws contributed to the erosion of our Hapū tribal structures. This is a key acknowledgement, because on the back, sometimes the Crown and the history books have colonisation reduced to a series of transactions that where they look to correct certain transactions that went wrong over certain bits of land, then they say they've pieced back together an honourable relationship. That is not the case. That's not factually correct. What we have tried to get the Crown to acknowledge, and in that Crown acknowledgement they've got some of the way there, is to say not only did your land laws come in and fragment up the land and trigger a series of transactions that then impacted on us, the part of the impact of that, knowingly or not, but we've obviously said to the Crown, you knew what you were doing because it was designed this way, contributed to the erosion of Te Whānau Apanui Hapū tribal structures. So they look to destabilise our self-government by the introduction of foreign land laws that then fragmented up our collectives and the way we socially organised ourselves. Once you start undermining that for a people that organise themselves collectively, you then are able to ride all of the colonial violence that comes by way of law and policy on the back of that, because you've weakened the tribal structures and the tribal governmental structures that supported us. So that acknowledgement is really important inside the Deed of Settlement. There's an acknowledgement from the Crown that they were aware that the crossing of the Motu was dangerous, and they had been, in fact, petitioned by Apanui to have a school in Maraenui for a period of time. The acknowledgement note that they were aware that the crossing of the Motu was potentially dangerous and of the tragic loss of life that occurred, and that it discriminated against Te Whānau Apanui when it declined to fund a bridge over the Motu River to make it safe. The reason that they declined that infrastructure investment was because Te Whānau Apanui would not open our lands up to European settlement. It was a punishment from the Crown upon us as an iwi, because we wouldn't allow foreigners to come into our lands. We wouldn't surrender our lands up for European settlement. So they then continued a situation where our children were at risk because they declined the funding for a safe bridge over the Motu, specifically for that reason. So that acknowledgement, again, this is the first time in history that the Crown have actually acknowledged that kino intention of theirs Not just that they didn't have the money, not just that they couldn't invest in that area because they had other priorities, but that there was a punitive or punishment element to the reason that they didn't invest in that safe infrastructure. The Crown acknowledged also the degradation of the Raukumara ranges and the sedimentation that is impacted on our awa, basically the desecration of our taiao, and what we are now fighting back with today with the Raukumara Restoration Project. The Crown acknowledged inside the Deed of Settlement their contribution to that, which has been huge in terms of the introduction of pest species and the mismanagement of that area. The acknowledgements, Crown acknowledgements, also acknowledge the impact of native schools to promote the assimilation of Te Whānau Apanui citizens. So to promote the assimilation of our mokopuna over to a colonial way of thinking, the impact of the native schools regime. So schools were required, as we know, to speak and teach in English at the time, and Whānau Apanui children, like many Māori mokopuna around the country, were punished for speaking their own language. There's an acknowledgement in there that the Crown failed to actively protect te reo rangatira and encourage its use. We know, of course, the impact of that on an Indigenous nation. When you take from them their ability to speak in their own language, means that they cannot access all of the mātauranga that comes in on the back of that language. So it's really the assimilationist policies that came through that native school regime have been a key tool in colonising our people, because they're about the colonisation of the mind and the replacement of our tribal Indigenous truths for a colonial narrative. So there's an acknowledgement in there around the impact of native schools. There's a specific Crown acknowledgement in regards to Apanui suffering socio and economic deprivation for far too long in a way that has impacted on our people. So Whānau Apanui have suffered socio-economic deprivation for far too long, and Apanui were not consulted about Crown policies that might have detrimental impact to their health, education, economic and cultural practices. This is not unknown to us. Largely the government in Wellington have carried on unilaterally making decisions for long periods of time and have sought not the consent of our people. Sometimes they've gone round in these policy roadshows, as we know, and reduced our right to give consent or have full, exclusive and undisturbed possession of our territories. They've reduced that to the right to be consulted sometimes. So we've got a Crown acknowledgement in there that there's been an impact in terms of socio-economic deprivation, but also the unilateral nature in which the Crown have continued to make decisions that impact on us without our consent. There's an acknowledgement that the Crown encouraged Te Whānau Apanui to leave our rohe, to alienate themselves from their own tribal lands. So leave the rohe, and this has impeded intergenerational transmission of mātauranga and eroded the cohesion of our iwi and resulted in disconnection of whole generations of our mokopuna to our tribal base and what used to be a source of strength for us in terms of our rangatiratanga, but now not connected because of the Crown's interference in our tribal self-government. There's an acknowledgement by the Crown that Whānau Apanui made significant contributions to the development of New Zealand, and despite Crown acts and omissions, Apanui have remained resilient and retained our tino rangatiratanga, tribal identity, mana motuhake to the present day. So there's a meaty chunk of those acknowledgements fleshed out in full in the Deed of Settlement, and that follows on into the apology, where the Crown then turn around and say, having admitted that we did all of those things, here's an apology from us for doing those things to your iwi.